Here we go. Hi, everybody listening in. We are reading from The Secret to Mental Health. The subtitle, An Operating Manual for the Human Mind by Dr. George Pransky. So I'm just going to start it off and then send it off to our next reader, and you can read along with us. This book is dedicated to my mentor and good friend, Sydney Banks. Before I met Sid, I was struggling in my life. After I met him, I realized how the human mind works and that I was only struggling in my mind. I'm forever grateful for Sid and his unending willingness to share. And I can say ditto. I feel exactly the same as George wrote. An introduction.
Hold on, let's see.
There we go. What if I told you that there was a set of principles that determine well-being in human beings? What if I said that people who understood these principles live in well-being? What if I suggest further that an understanding of these principles is the sole determinant of well-being? The purpose of this book is to share discoveries about the nature of mental health that have the potential to impact for the better the mental health of society. So far, I agree with every single word, every sentence. The current paradigm in the mental health field could be called an outside-in view of the human experience. That is to say that the current paradigm assumes that our stress and mental illness is caused by factors beyond our control, such as biological factors, childhood conditioning, trauma, and life stressors. Thus, the current mental health model assumes that these forces lead to the state of our psyche, soul, mind, spirit, which then leads to our causes or which then leads to or causes our behavior. It makes perfect sense that psychologists would assume that these factors are calling the shots. After all, everyone does have a biological makeup that is often visible in the person's behavior. Traumatic life events do impact people in various ways. However, there is evidence that shows that these external factors are not running the show. Members of the same family could have very different levels of mental health, even as they share the same family of origin. Conditioning and biological factors. One sibling sees his past for what it is, memories carried through time, through thought. The other sibling doesn't see memory for what it is. The thoughts and feelings that come to mind as memory look real to him and therefore have a strong influence in his life. New discoveries about mental health suggest an inside-out view of the human experience. The psyche is not a passive victim of powers beyond our control. To the contrary, it is the psyche that is actively creating our moment-to-moment experience. It is our psyche that creates the perception that we are controlled by outside factors. Ooh, this is good. Two people under the same life stressors will be affected differently. Person A sees these stressors as threatening to the point of debilitation, while person B sees them as all in a day's work. No threat, no problem. The inside-out model shows that our experience of life works in a different direction. When people gain a true understanding of how the mind works, how the psyche is able to create our moment-to-moment experience. This understanding influences the functioning of the psyche. The more understanding a person has, the better they function. Really, really true. Not just me personally, but clients as well. The history of physical health provides a parallel example of changing the paradigm. For many decades, it was thought that germs were the direct cause of physical illness. As the medical field gained an understanding of the role of the immune system, it realized that the immune system was at least a middleman, a party to people's illness. Indeed, a culture of any human tongue would show a multitude of germs. Yet people aren't constantly sick. The strength of the immune system is the controlling variable in a person's moment-to-moment health. This book will explain how understanding strengthens our psychological immune system. Instead of protecting us from germs, it protects us from all those factors listed above: biological, childhood conditioning, traumas, and life stressors. Like germs on the tongue, all these factors could potentially affect us. As the psychological immune system gets stronger, those factors have less influence on us. Wow. True. The mental health field has assumed that external factors are the active forces driving a passive psyche towards stress and mental illness. Since the illnesses originate in the mind of each person, then the mind must be addressed for the illness to be cured. The psyche has not been addressed or understood by the mental health profession because it is seen as a passive agent. The field of psychology doesn't study the mind as I am defining it. It studies the brain. It focuses on understanding memory and understanding the hardware of the brain. The brain is our mental hardware, our personal computer. Memory is the data stored on that computer. These new discoveries I'm describing suggest that the mind is something entirely different from the brain. The mind provides the software, the intelligence that is used to process our memories. The mind is also the intelligence that allows for original thought, insight, and creativity. This intelligence does not come from the brain, but rather goes through the brain. When you study the mind, you must ask certain questions. To me, these are the questions that address the issue of well-being. What gives us the power to think? What is the source of creative thought? How does the mind create our moment-to-moment experience of life? Why do thoughts have so much influence on us? Why and how does thinking look so real to human beings? How much freedom of thought, also known as free will, do we actually have? In 1973, a Canadian man with a 9th grade education had an epiphany that answers these questions and more. During this epiphany, he realized a set of principles that explain how the mind works. Rather than seeing the mind as a passive receptor of external forces, Sydney Banks saw the mind as the only player in our psychological lives. He saw that all the answers we need to improve mental health lie inside of us. These principles encapsulate an understanding of what the mind is and how it works. These principles explain the psychological nature of our lives, how human beings are destined to live in the psychological arena. As people understand these principles, they unlock the power of the mind, the true nature of mental health, and access to mental health. In all my years in graduate school, I never heard one word about mental health. All my instruction was about mental illness. I can relate to that. I was taught about the symptoms of mental illness. I was taught about the cause and the treatment of mental illness. There was absolutely no instruction about what mental health is, where it comes from, and how natural it is to human beings. There was no discussion of how to maintain mental health, only how to cure mental illness. There was some discussion about stress management techniques, but no discussion about how to live a fully engaged life without taking on stress. When I met Sydney Banks in 1976, people that exemplified mental health surrounded him. As mentally healthy as they were all interested in learning more about mental well-being. They were essentially students of mental well-being. And the principles that Sid shared were their lessons. After I learned these principles, I was no longer treating mental illness, but rather teaching mental health. I knew that if people were psychologically healthy, had a healthy psychological immune system, that immune system would cure whatever mental illness they had. In addition, an understanding of these principles would ward off mental illnesses. It had a preventative potential. The more mentally healthy people are, the more able they are to tolerate and mediate stress in their lives. It's like nothing sticks to them. I knew I didn't have to treat the specific presenting problems of my clients. All I had to do was help them raise their level of mental health, and their high level of mental health would cure their illnesses and provide them with the power to solve their own problems. I can attest to that too.
Yes.
If you have a basement that's dark and damp, you are bound to have mold. It makes no sense to use a cleaner on mold in this environment because new mold is bound to keep growing. The only sensible solution is to make the environment mold-proof, dry and light. Ignorance of how the mind works is an environment that spawns mental illnesses. Oh boy, George, you've got it. Wow. Treating specific mental illnesses makes no sense because mental illnesses are bound to appear in a mentally unhealthy environment. Giving people an understanding of how the mind works creates a mentally healthy environment within which mental illnesses find it difficult to take hold. Thus, it is now possible to directly improve people's mental health without concern for the specific mental illnesses or life problems that those people encounter. Just as all ships rise with a rising tide, all mental problems disappear as the level of well-being rises. Absolutely true, George. Many of the discoveries about mental health are both surprising and hopeful to me. Imagine that you would talk to someone and as a result, that person's mental health would significantly improve from that point on. Before I learned these principles of mental health, I couldn't imagine how talking to anybody would have any permanent impact. If you gave them a motivational speech, the inspiration they received would wear off in a matter of time. What about advice and good ideas? Sure, they might help someone, but it's doubtful that it would significantly change the person's life. I now understand that the principles explaining how the mind works can improve a person's mental health significantly on a go-forward basis. These principles resonate with something that is already present within every human being. Every human being understands these principles deep inside their consciousness. Listening to someone talk about the principles simply awakens them to something they already know. This is the fact that makes the principles so hopeful. Everyone has the ability to understand them, and understanding them will lead people to their mental health. Imagine that you are living a life for 36 years with a steady diet of stress. Suddenly, one day, your mental health level is elevated and stays that way. Your anxiety level goes from the top 30% of the population to the bottom 5%, essentially overnight. Your job satisfaction, the quality of your relationships, and your enjoyment of your free time catapults to levels you didn't even think possible. This is what happened to me and has been happening to the clients of people who share these principles. The field of psychology has historically become more and more specialized to meet people's mental health needs. Imagine that a therapy approach is introduced that is so generic that it can treat every diagnosis and every demographic. Absolutely can attest to that.
Yep.
Moving away from specialization would have a significantly positive impact on the field of psychology. Imagine how much the effectiveness of therapy would improve when practitioners and researchers alike are pulling in the same direction. Imagine that a mental health professional could work for years with high job satisfaction and no burnout with even the most difficult and most troubled patients. I can attest to that. Imagine that the very act of sharing these principles to others improves the mental health of the professional. Imagine that the mental health professional who taught these principles would have to have a high level of mental health themselves to have any therapeutic impact. The principles are the foundation that allow all the above to occur. The human mind operates in a way as to make health and well-being not just possible, but always close at hand. That was so powerful. I'm going to pause the recording. So true.